the first thing that I started paying attention to was the fact that people were comparing Putin to Hitler, and the only thing that like immediately came to my mind was that is historically and also like intellectually a little dishonest. I understand where the sentiment is coming from, but I even saw like a meme of like a caricature of Hitler with like a little like handout.
Yeah.
And Putin was at the bottom, like a baby Putin, like teach me your ways or whatever the fuck it was, right?
Yeah.
And like that's cute for like a comedic like satire kind of thing, but like they're really not. Like Putin was and is only concerned with restoring the Soviet Union power, and Hitler was worried about world domination. Like that's a two completely different strands of thinking. Both crazy. Fucking horrible, both like not okay. But the comparison is a little bit like ahistoric for me. But the second thing, the thing that I took to Bree's point that I found to be extremely fascinating, is that this is the very first time that in the history of the world, like the last world war, the last big war that the United States was on was Desert Storm, right? The Gulf War in 2000s. Social media wasn't around yet. So we just have the movies, American Sniper, and like all these things, and like about like shit that went on in Desert Storm and like what it was and whatever, right? Despite the fact that was a debacle politically and there were no weapons of mass destruction and all the fucking lies that the government told us about that shit, it's still like that was the last one. We are seeing now this unfold in real time online. Right before our eyes in a way that I just find it fascinating because that's completely unprecedented. We used to go to the news. It just goes to show how much the news is obsolete now. Like, we used to go to the news and turn on Fox and CNN or MSNBC or whatever the fuck. The thing that these 24-hour news channels are actually designed for is these emergencies. And we used to go and be like, yo, let's get our information. And even that information was tailored and, cut down, and like the fat was trimmed off of it. Only what you need to know, right? As an American citizen. Cool, whatever, digestible. Now we're seeing it, and we're seeing so many different perspectives in real time at the same time. Like in a matter of 15 minutes, I not only saw Republican pundits and Republican people in the United States start the hashtag trending of Biden is a coward, while the leftists were talking about how we need to be really cautious and how people don't understand, foreign affairs. While at the same time, from friends, from people that we know that are from Ukraine, or at least people that we know about, stories of them packing up their houses, to videos of planes shelling neighborhoods, and videos of like tanks demolishing like cars and shit like that, to TikToks of Russian soldiers parachuting from the ground, making TikToks and laughing about it as they're coming down into Ukraine. Like, that is wild. Like, all of these different perspectives all at the same time, in real time. Like, for me, I'm like absolutely stunned. I keep checking it, not because I'm like deeply invested in what's going on there in terms of like it's affecting me here in the now, and like I don't know anything about their history or things like that, but like so many different places and so many different perspectives from so many different kinds of people, and I'm like, this is like one of the most amazing things that I've ever experienced ever. Because imagine if that happened during World War II. And like you were getting real live tweets, 140 characters of Germans inside of Germany tweeting out, like, I mean, like, I don't really like Hitler in Nazi Germany, or like, shit like that, because that's what's happening in Moscow. Moscow, there are protests outside,
right now.
And you know what I'm saying? And it's like, holy shit, like we're getting it, like we're not just getting digested news from the news, the big news corporate media anymore. Now we're getting real live accounts from people on the ground, from all these different sides, and it's so difficult to form a narrative inside anything.
It's very hard, because
you know what I'm
right
saying?
now you're noticing how not black and white all of this is.
How nuanced history is gonna be.
Because all of this is, I was speaking about this with our father, and we were talking about the fact that the war that
Shout out
we
to
know
Pops.
about, the World War II was pretty much you were geared as an American to believe one thing. You
Yeah.
were geared as a German to believe another. You were geared as whatever country you were from to believe one specific thing. Meanwhile, now you're getting all of these different accounts. You're really living and seeing how Russians don't want war.
Look.
How it's not Russians, now not all Russians, but most Russians are like, I don't want this. Like,
Right.
why are you fighting a fight that I don't want to fight? Like,
The industrialization of the Western world depended on war to some degree because of the fact that whenever the Red Scare was happening, the way to mobilize American citizens was to instill fear that they were going to lose their freedom. So everybody goes to work. The mom, the housewife, everybody starts making buttons, fucking star-spangled everything. You know what I mean? The conveyor belt, the Ford starts, sanctioning off or like severing off parts of their factories so they can start making like artillery and shit like that. Like all of a sudden, the machine that is the United States joins together and like says, okay, we have a common enemy. That cannot happen
that can't
anymore.
happen anymore. No.
There is no way that as a nation we're ever going to be able to coexist together in the fact that we can all go towards a common enemy now. Because we're going to be like completely polarized. You know what I'm saying? And it's fascinating to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the parachutes, but it
I
was
haven't seen
hilarious.
anything. Like, I literally haven't seen, like, I've heard about it. That's also why I'm not saying anything, because I'm like, I don't feel qualified to talk about this. Like, I don't feel like I have nearly enough information to talk about this. But I do think that's, like, I get what you're saying, that, like, it's really different to experience that kind of, like, historical event, like, now than it was. I mean, I do feel like, at this, I mean, I think it's kind of hard because on one hand, I'm like, I mean, I feel like we have seen a lot of shit like that in the last couple of years, though. You know what I mean? Like, in the Middle East and Syria and Iraq and stuff like that, where I'm like, we're not, like, strangers to this. Like, we have seen shit like that. We've been getting that kind of, like, content and those videos, like, all over social media and those accounts from, like, real people who live there and what their opinions are on it. But I obviously think that with, like, in this situation where it feels so like we really don't know what the fuck is gonna happen or when it's gonna happen, I feel like maybe that's the special aspect of it, of being like, we don't know what the fuck is gonna happen. Like, we don't know what they're gonna do. Like, there's no, you know what I mean? Like, what's the precedent for this?
Yeah.
Like what happens next? I fast forward like 20 years, and we're like, whatever history book is gonna get written on, you know what I mean? And like how this is gonna be like portrayed in the history books, and like how it's gonna be all
Because
condensed to like
I'm
4
thinking,
paragraphs
like,
or like 1 chapter or whatever.
That's assuming something happins.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
if
it's
something
like,
happens,
what if
I
it
keep thinking, like,
doesn't?
in my mind, I'm like, man, 20 years from now, somebody's kid around me, my kid, somebody's gonna be like reading it, and they'll be like, oh, like, look, like, there's a whole chapter devoted on this thing, and they're gonna talk about it in a specific way, and I'm gonna look at it and be like, hold
That's
up,
not what happened.
hold up,
That
homie,
ain't
like
what
that.
happened.
That is tailored information. You know what I mean? Like, that is like, that's not what was going on. Like, I remember specifically, vividly, blah, 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 blah. And it just goes to show how out of touch, even though we know, like, the last episode we were talking about Whoopi and like Holocaust and stuff like that, or 2 episodes ago or whatever, like, it just goes to show how, like, even the more information that we get as we learn books or whatever, blah, 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 like, it's still, from a person that actually lived through it, they have a even more nuanced position.
Yeah.
And we have to, like, I keep thinking, like, I have to keep that in mind whenever I'm thinking about these kinds of things, because in 20, 30 years, 40 years, I'm going to be like, that's not exactly how that felt. That's not exactly what that was. Like, there
Even
was
then
some
we-
opposing views. There was hella opposing views.